reawakening because they were political.
Yeah.
They were artistic collaborators. My mother ran a theater and cooked the breakfast and knew where we all were.
At 63 years old, Nell Newman, daughter of the famous Paul Newman, finally decided to speak out in a shocking interview with CBS Sunday Morning. For the first time, she revealed secrets that shook and even destroyed one of Hollywood's most carefully protected images. Behind those famous blue eyes that became a lasting symbol on the big screen, there was not the loving father or perfect husband the world believed in. Instead, there was the picture of a man living two lives. One life was bright and public, while the other was hidden and kept only for the man he truly loved. The hardest truth came in his final will, a cold paper that erased his family's name and gave his entire fortune to a mysterious man known only by two letters, R.R. But who was R.R.? And why would someone as celebrated as Paul Newman turn his back on his wife and children? All to protect a hidden love, a relationship he never admitted, not even in his final days. These truths are revealed in today's video. Westport, Connecticut, a quiet town for the very rich. People believed every iron gate there led to happiness. But behind the gates of the Newman home, little Nell, a blonde girl who liked to sit under an oak tree and write in her notebook, learned a painful truth early on. In this house, asking certain questions could cost you your parents' love. I used to think my family was perfect, like the pictures framed behind glass hanging on the walls. But then I realized pictures don't talk, and neither did my family. In Nell's memory, she had never seen her parents hold hands. Not rarely, never. Even hugs in front of cameras lasted only a second, like two actors forcing themselves to finish a scene they were tired of. Paul Newman, the man with the blue eyes who made half the women in the world fall for him, was cold as stone at home. Joanne Woodward, beautiful, kind, and graceful, would become so withdrawn and quiet it was almost frightening whenever he walked into the room. There was a time I tried to hold my mother's hand while she was washing dishes and asked, "Are you sad?" She pulled her hand away as if she had touched fire. My mother wasn't angry, she just didn't know how to touch anyone when feelings were involved. Every morning, my father left the house at dawn without saying where he was going. When he came back, sometimes after a few days, sometimes after weeks, he would only give a faint smile before going straight into his study, shutting the door. From inside, I sometimes heard a deep laugh during long phone calls. But never, not once, was the voice on the other end my mother's. Nell clearly remembered a winter night in 1972 when she heard the sound of a glass breaking in her mother's room. She rushed in and found Joanne on the floor, holding a piece of broken glass in her hand, saying again and again, "You lied again! You lied again!" When Nell shook and asked, "What did father do?" her mother just looked at her and whispered with trembling lips, "Not every man loves women, darling, but Hollywood will never accept that." In that moment, Nell's young heart broke. Not long after, she found an old Polaroid that had slipped out of her father's wallet. In the photo, Paul Newman was smiling, his arm around another man, not like just friends. Paul's look toward him was the look of a man in love. When Nell showed the picture to her mother, Joanne grabbed it, tore it up, and burned it in the fireplace, whispering, "We will never speak of this, never." From that day on, Nell understood the rules of the house. Never ask where her father went. Never ask why her mother took sleeping pills every night. Never ask why her parents slept in different beds on separate floors. And most of all, never ask about love.
We lived surrounded by walls covered with Oscar portraits, but not one of them showed happiness, she said with a broken voice. Whenever guests came, especially people like Gore Vidal, Robert Redford, or unfamiliar men from New York, the mood in the house completely changed. Paul would dress perfectly, wear a scent we had never smelled before, and the night always ended with the sound of his bedroom door locking. No one asked who he had been with. No one asked why Joanne slipped away early, her face pale as if she had been crying. We had pictures that looked perfect, but our hearts were empty. Everything was fake. And the worst part was that I once thought I was wrong for feeling that way. As she grew up, Nell started to notice the signs more clearly. One night, she found her father in the kitchen, staring at a wrinkled letter before burning it with a lighter that had the initials GV engraved on it. When she asked who he had been writing to, Paul only said softly, "Don't become someone I have to keep secret." But the memory that stayed with her most, carved forever in her mind, was the night her mother, while sleepwalking, whispered, "I am not jealous of women. I am only afraid that I will never be enough compared to him." That one sentence tore apart the false story the family had tried to keep closed for decades. The first person to break that silence was her brother, Scott Newman. He was the one who asked the most forbidden question in that house, and he paid for it with his life. Scott was different from the rest of us, Nell said with a breaking voice in her CBS interview in 2025. He was the first to say out loud the very thing all of us were choking on inside. Scott Newman, the oldest son, the one Hollywood once called Paul Newman's rebellious double, grew up in the glow of fame. But early on, he realized that this light was not glory. It was the spotlight of a tragedy ready to explode. From birth, the weight of the Newman name pressed down on him. He was expected to be polished, gifted, manly, and successful, just like his legendary father. Yet even in high school, Scott asked himself why he had never seen his mother hold his father's hand. Why, when his mother cried, did his father never comfort her? And why did Scott always say, "I love you," and Paul only smirk and turn away? The hardest question of all was this: why did Paul spend so much time with men who were clearly more than just friends? I still remember the nights when I could hear my mother crying in her room. Scott would smash his guitar until the neck broke, while our father sat downstairs alone, pouring drinks and watching the news.
In 1974, something happened that left a scar. At a small party, a drunk boy shouted, "Hey Scott, maybe you should ask your dad if he likes men or women before you try to follow in his steps." Scott exploded with rage, beating the boy so badly he needed 6 stitches. Within a week, Scott was expelled. Paul never showed up at the school, never came to face his son. Instead, he sent a lawyer with money to quietly settle things. Not one word of comfort, not one hug. Scott came home, threw his old award certificate into the fireplace, and shouted, "You don't protect me! You don't protect Mom!" Then he yelled, "Who are you really?" For the first time, that question was spoken out loud, and still, the house stayed silent. A year later, Nell found a thin notebook hidden under Scott's mattress. She kept it for years like a treasure. Inside were pages written in black ink, smudged with tears. "If he doesn't love Mom, then who am I? Am I just an accident, or the result of a lifelong lie? Was I born from love, or just to protect his image?" Those words felt to Nell like a rope tightening around her throat. But the biggest shock came in 1977, when Confidential Weekly printed a black-and-white photo taken at Malibu Beach in 1959. The picture showed a man who looked almost exactly like Paul Newman, walking hand in hand with another man. Both wore white shirts, dress pants, and were barefoot on the sand. There were no kisses, no touches, but the way they looked at each other, tender and close, made it impossible to believe they were only friends. Hollywood was stunned. The press didn't dare say it directly, but rumors exploded again, with headlines asking, "Who is the man in Paul's life?" and the hidden side of a masculine icon. At that exact time, Scott was about to sign his first action film contract, but suddenly the deal was canceled. No one told him the reason, but he overheard a producer whisper, "Audiences will never see you as a hero if your father is a man living a double life." That night, Scott smashed the bathroom mirror. He made a shallow cut on his wrist. The wound wasn't deep, but enough blood spilled to make his mother scream when she found him. Paul wasn't there. He was in New York with someone the press called his close companion. From then on, Scott fell apart. He changed his phone number, cut ties with the family, and sank into drugs, not to get high, but to drown out the coldness in the eyes of the man America worshipped. "I remember calling him once," Nell said. "All I heard was a heavy sigh before he hung up." The last time they spoke, he asked her one question. "Do you think Dad ever truly loved anyone?" She couldn't bring herself to answer. 1 month later, on November 20th, 1978, Los Angeles police broke down the door of Scott's small apartment. They found him lying dead on the living room floor. Beside him were a few pills, half a bottle of red wine, and the TV still on, ironically showing Paul Newman walking onto a stage to accept an award for Slapshot. The investigation report said, "No signs of violence. Cause of death, suspected suicide from drug overdose." Nell was only 18 at the time, but deep down she knew Scott didn't die from drugs. He didn't die from alcohol. He died from silence. He died because no one ever answered the question he carried his whole life. Did our father ever live in truth? And if not, then what are we really? From that pain, Nell slowly came to see that her family and even her father's legacy had been built on layers of secrets never meant to be spoken. One winter night in 1981, snow and wind covered the yard of the Newman home in Westport. In that freezing cold, Nell, then 22, quietly walked down the hall to get a blanket from the kitchen. But she froze when she reached her father's study. A warm yellow light shone through the crack of the half-closed door. What stopped her wasn't the light, but a sigh. It wasn't the sharp breath of an actor practicing lines, nor the tired sound of someone after a phone call. It was a deep, heavy sigh, as though a secret was pressing so hard on his chest it wanted to break free. Nell stood still, then slowly moved closer and peeked through the gap. Paul Newman sat alone, a fountain pen in hand, writing quickly across a thick stack of paper. On the desk was not a film script nor one of his reports. It was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, written in the same handwriting Nell had only seen before on Christmas cards for her mother. But this time, the letter was not to Joanne. The first line read, "Dear Red, the one who reminds me that I am still human, not only a symbol." Nell froze. In that moment, it felt like all her unspoken childhood questions were answered in her father's shaky pen strokes.
In the letter, Paul wrote nothing about movies, fame, or awards. Instead, he described the look in Robert Redford's eyes when they stood together in the Utah desert filming the final scene of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote about how Redford's hand brushed his shoulder when no one was watching, and about nights spent on hotel rooftops drinking whiskey in silence, 2 men too afraid to speak, knowing that if they did, the truth would be undeniable. "There was one night you only looked at me, and I felt the whole world forgive me. Red, you didn't have to say a word, but if you walked into this room one day and looked at me the same way again, I would give up everything, the fame, the family, all of Hollywood." Nell's breath grew fast. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the page. Just then, the phone rang in the next room. Paul got up and left the desk. Nell quickly put the letter back and stepped away, as if she had broken into a vault of national secrets. But one truth stayed in her mind forever. Her father had not been writing to a friend. He was writing to the one who held his heart. A few weeks later, reality showed itself. Joanne Woodward, who was in California for a Vogue photo shoot, suddenly canceled her schedule and rushed onto the first flight to Westport. The reason? An anonymous phone call with no number saying only one chilling line: "If you still care about your marriage, go to the Mayflower Hotel, room 708. That same night, Paul told everyone he was in New York to meet a partner about a new script. That partner was Robert Redford, the man the press often called his soulmate. No one knows for sure what happened inside room 708, but when Joanne returned home to Westport, she said nothing. Her face was pale. A dark bruise marked her arm, as if someone had grabbed it too hard. Her swollen eyes, hidden under makeup, could not cover the fact that she had been crying. That night, for the first time in decades, the usually silent mansion echoed with the crash of objects in the bedroom. No shouting, no arguments, just the sharp sound of an Italian porcelain lamp smashing on the floor. From that moment, Paul Newman began to change. He started smoking again, the habit Joanne had made him quit back in the 1960s. He stopped sleeping well, often sitting outside on the porch past midnight, staring silently into the dark. Some nights, Nell caught him standing before a mirror, gripping a fountain pen so hard it seemed he might break it in half. Once, when Nell accidentally dropped a Beatles record in the dining room, he smashed the baccarat crystal vase on the table, a wedding gift to Joanne, and walked out without saying a word. He didn't curse, but the silence he left was heavier than any blow. Joanne, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into herself, moving around the house like a shadow. From that night forward, she never again called Paul honey or my love. When a reporter asked her about Robert Redford, she answered coldly with only 2 words: "That man." No name, no title, no warmth. At the time, Nell was still studying ecology, but she slowly began to understand that her parents' marriage was not built on love. It was like a 50-year-long stage play, with 2 great actors clinging to their roles to keep the set from falling apart. But one lonely letter, one anonymous phone call, and one hotel room had revealed cracks that were always there. From then on, Nell started paying more attention. In an old drawer in her father's study, she found lists of phone numbers marked only with the letters R or T, no last names. Some were crossed out, others had notes like, "Call back after 10 p.m." or "Don't let Joanne know." She also found faded photos folded small and hidden behind family portraits, faces of strangers whose eyes looked too long, too tenderly at her father. And just when Nell thought she finally understood everything, she realized something else. Robert Redford might have been the most important, but he wasn't the only one in her father's life. In 1981, in the lobby of the Carlyle Hotel, a place known for New York's elite, a secret slipped quietly through the carpeted halls, one no one would ever expect to see there. That evening, Nell had only planned to drop off a stack of documents for her mother. She had just come from an internship interview at a TV station and was still excited. But when the elevator doors opened, she froze, caught in a scene that felt like a forgotten frame from the family movie she once thought was perfect. Her father, Paul Newman, walked in from the left hallway. But beside him was not Joanne. It was Gore Vidal, the famous writer, sharp political voice, and longtime family friend of over 20 years. Yet that night, he didn't move like a friend. He walked beside Paul like a lover. Gore's hand brushed Paul's wrist, lingered for a moment in a tender stroke, then pulled back. Paul tilted his head and gave a small smile. Both wore long coats, walking so close it looked like one small breeze might press their faces together. Then Paul saw his daughter. "That look, I'll never forget it," Nell told Esquire in 2018. "It wasn't the look of a father caught doing something wrong. It was the look of a man begging silently, 'Don't say it. Please don't.'" Gore smiled at her as if nothing had happened. Paul walked straight into the elevator. The doors closed, and Nell stood frozen, now carrying the secret she had just witnessed. From that night, Gore Vidal didn't disappear. He appeared more often. Joanne stayed silent, but Nell saw the signs. Phone calls at 2 a.m., business trips that lasted days without word, and handwritten notes left by the house phone with lines like, "And G called back once." She once saw her father pull from this pocket an old black-and-white photo, Paul and Gore by a lakeside, leaning against each other, their eyes lost in the distance. They looked like two men who had crossed far beyond friendship, but could never return. Once, when Nell accidentally dropped a Beatles record in the dining room, he smashed the baccarat crystal vase on the table, a wedding gift to Joanne, and walked out without saying a word. He didn't curse, but the silence he left was heavier than any blow. Joanne, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into herself, moving around the house like a shadow. From that night forward, she never again called Paul honey or my love. When a reporter asked her about Robert Redford, she answered coldly with only 2 words, "That man." No name, no title, no warmth. At the time, Nell was still studying ecology, but she slowly began to understand that her parents' marriage was not built on love. It was like a 50-year-long stage play with 2 great actors clinging to their roles to keep the set from falling apart. But one lonely letter, one anonymous phone call, and one hotel room had revealed cracks that were always there. From then on, Nell started paying more attention. In an old drawer in her father's study, she found lists of phone numbers marked only with the letters R or T, no last names. Some were crossed out, others had notes like, "Call back after 10 p.m." or "Don't let Joanne know." She also found faded photos folded small and hidden behind family portraits, faces of strangers whose eyes looked too long, too tenderly at her father. And just when Nell thought she finally understood everything, she realized something else. Robert Redford might have been the most important, but he wasn't the only one in her father's life.
Gore Vidal never publicly admitted anything, but in 1995, in his memoir Palimpsest, he wrote a single line that shook the American literary world. "There are men who will never belong to us, but every time they smile, we feel alive." He didn't name Paul, yet everyone knew Gore had never written such words for anyone else, not even for the men he openly loved. Only one man, and that man had never admitted a thing. Even in a late-life interview with Vanity Fair in 2006, when asked, "Was Paul Newman the greatest love of your life?" Gore only shrugged, sipped his drink, and stared at the camera. "We shared nights neither of us ever wanted to leave. That is all I can say." The studio fell silent. No one asked another question. Nell didn't need to. She already knew what those words meant. In 2003, when Joanne began showing early signs of memory loss, forgetting birthdays, forgetting even familiar names, one thing stayed in her mind. In one moment, drifting between dream and wakefulness, she gripped Nell's hand tightly and whispered, "Do you know the way your father looked at Gore? That was a look he never gave me. And even if I forget everything, even if I lose myself, I will never forget that look." Joanne Woodward had once been seen as the symbol of intelligence and grace in Hollywood, a rare sign of loyalty in a world full of lies and illusions. She won the famous Academy Award for her role in The 3 Faces of Eve, and she was also the only woman Paul Newman ever openly said he would never leave. On the cover of Life magazine, the two were shown as America's model couple, bright, romantic, and seemingly perfect, the image of true love. But all that glory and praise had by then become only a memory. Joanne now sat alone in a small room at a nursing home in Westport, Connecticut. The weak sunlight that came through the dim window no longer warmed her thin, wrinkled hands, the same hands that had held Paul Newman's heart for more than 50 years. Alzheimer's moved in like a hidden thief, quietly stealing her memories one by one. From the important, like Nell's birthday, to moments she thought she could never lose,
her first role, the awards she cherished, or the nights she stood beneath the glowing Broadway lights. One day, Nell brought her mother an old photo from the Golden Globe Awards in 1974. Joanne stared at it for a long time before softly asking, "Who is this person? Do I know them?" And yet, even as the illness seemed to erase her whole life, one name stayed clear, surfacing again and again. Not Paul Newman, not her children, it was Robert. At first, Nell thought it was just a mistake, a random memory from her mother's fading mind. But soon the nurses at the home gave her uneasy looks and whispered that at night Joanne would sometimes wake suddenly, her eyes empty, but her voice strangely sharp, as if speaking a truth she had never dared to say. She spoke of a strange perfume on her husband's clothes, of phone calls never answered from the Essex House Hotel in New York, of a single golden hair left behind on a pillow, things that had nothing to do with her. And finally, she said the name slowly, heavily, with sorrow in every sound. Robert. It was a name Nell had only heard once in her life, almost 40 years earlier, when she had skipped school and gone to New York. There she had seen her father step out of the elevator at the Essex House Hotel with the man the world always called his closest friend, Robert. She was only 17 then. She froze behind a marble pillar, watching her father in a gray suit, elegant as always, rest his hand gently on Robert's shoulder and say something that made them both laugh, free, close, natural, as if they had nothing to hide. She kept silent, never telling her mother, locking that memory away deep inside herself. She convinced herself it was only the imagination of a teenager, that maybe she had seen wrong, and that it wasn't worth upsetting the fragile balance of a family built on fame and pressure. But now, hearing her mother's own broken voice talk of the same hotel, the same strange scent, the same look she herself had seen once before, everything inside Nell collapsed like sand washed away by a storm.
"That was the day he betrayed me," Joanne whispered as she stared at a photograph from Rhode Island Beach, where the whole family had shared a warm summer in 1985. "He told me he was going to meet a director about a new script, but I knew, I always knew, because that look, it was never meant for me." Then she lowered her head, her voice weak as if her breath was fading, but she still repeated each word. "Essex House, room 1217. I called all night, but no one ever answered." What might have sounded like broken words matched perfectly with the memory Nell had long buried. She sat in silence, her chest heavy as if crushed under a great weight. Her mother, the woman who had forgiven all of her husband's sins, who had defended the family's honor for more than 50 years, still remembered with sharp clarity the number of a hotel room the world wanted her to forget. Even though her mind was fading, her heart still carried the pain of betrayal. Joanne never screamed, she never shouted blame, but her eyes, whenever they turned toward the fading evening light outside the window, spoke silently of wounds that time could never heal. Once Nell asked her, "Do you still remember how Dad loved you?" Joanne turned her head, her clouded eyes steady, and softly answered, her voice thin as mist, "I once believed it, but after that day, I never did." Everything that had once been seen as the perfect love story, the model of a loyal Hollywood marriage, now was nothing more than soap bubbles breaking under the harsh light of truth. And just when the whole family was preparing for a sad but peaceful goodbye, believing Paul would stay with Joanne until her last days, he, the man loved and admired across America, left behind a shock no one saw coming. No one could have guessed that behind Paul Newman's well-known face, the man who always charmed the public with his kind eyes and endless charity, there was a choice so cold and harsh it brought his own family to their knees. What made it worse was that it wasn't a mistake or careless act, but a planned decision set in place long before.
The more Nell read the will, the harder it was to breathe. The entire fortune of Newman's own, the $100 million salad dressing empire, was not divided fairly as Paul had promised. Nothing was left for Joanne, the wife who was slowly forgetting even her own name. Nothing was left for the children who had shared in the struggles and sacrifices of building the brand. Instead, everything was left to one man, Robert Forrester, a name that had always stayed in the background like a shadow. And then, when the lawyer read aloud, Paul had signed a no-contest clause. Anyone who challenged the will would lose even the small amount of cash left to them. Nell felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured into her chest. In shock, she whispered to her sister Clea, "We didn't just lose our father. We lost the chance to ever truly know who he was." Even worse, a secret add-on to the will, leaked by a former law office assistant, revealed that Paul had once thought about creating a private trust called the Quiet Legacy. The most shocking part? The first beneficiary was not his wife or children, but a mysterious person known only by the initials RR. Soon after, both Vanity Fair and the New York Post ran explosive stories suggesting RR might mean Robert Redford. The public was stunned. Old rumors of a secret relationship between the two men, rumors long dismissed, came back louder and more unsettling than ever. Things grew darker when a journalist from The Advocate claimed Paul and Redford once took a secret trip to Tuscany in 1982. No wives, no children, no assistants. Just the two of them inside a private villa behind locked gates. Nell had never heard of this trip, but when she called Dorothy Hughes, her mother's close friend and personal assistant in the 1980s, the reply shook her deeply. Dorothy said Joanne knew about the trip, but stayed quiet. She believed that if Paul had his freedom, maybe he would return to her. Maybe not whole, but still hers. But in the end, Paul left behind nothing but a fortress of wealth and power handed over to another man with legal terms as sharp as knives, cutting the last ties to his own family. Not a single handwritten letter, not one explanation, only cold signatures on paper, and one sentence spoken by Robert Forrester at a 2009 press conference. When asked why Paul had cut out his family, he said, "He trusted me, and I believe that is the only thing that truly matters." Those words fell like a slammed door, like a final judgment, leaving Nell's head full of questions that would never be answered.
The father, who once swore he would live and die for his family, had now turned them into strangers. On September 26, 2008, Paul Newman, the Hollywood legend with the famous blue eyes, took his last breath at his farmhouse in Westport, Connecticut. The whole country went silent. CBS replayed his iconic scenes from The Hustler and Cool Hand Luke. CNN aired a special with tributes from friends, co-workers, and even strangers who had admired him. Everyone believed that behind all the fame was a perfect family, a loyal wife, and children proud to carry the Newman name. But that was only half the truth. Just 3 days after his death, Nell Newman, his eldest daughter, got a cold call from his private law office. "We have activated the will according to his instructions. Please check your mailbox. The division of assets has been completed. Only a few minor points remain." At that moment, Nell felt with certainty that something was terribly wrong. And she was right. The final will, signed only 6 weeks before Paul's death, erased the names of his wife and 6 children completely. His whole estate, worth more than $600 million, including shares in Newman's own, real estate, image rights, and royalties, was given fully to one legal entity, the Newman's Own Foundation. And at its head was Robert Forrester, the former CEO of the charity empire and the man Paul trusted most in his last years. The family exploded in anger right away, but what made it worse was the silence of the media. No big outlet dared to ask why Joanne Woodward,
The wife who had stood by him for 50 years and was now battling dementia was left with nothing. Nell, who had once run the foundation's environmental branch, was fired just months later, without reason, without warning. In a rare interview with the New York Times in 2015, Nell spoke through constant tears. "I never asked for money, but I could not stand how they turned my father into a tool and pushed my mother aside as if she had never been part of his life." From there, an unofficial investigation began. Independent lawyers, reporters, and even Paul Newman's old co-workers came to the same chilling thought. Paul may not have been fully in his right mind when he signed his final will. Leaked medical files from a New York clinic showed that by mid-2007, Paul was showing signs of memory loss, confusion, disorientation, and poor judgment. In May 2008, only 3 months before signing the will, he was reportedly diagnosed with temporary incapacity to make legal decisions, yet those records were never made official. One anonymous source who had worked with Paul's legal team told Vanity Fair, "I saw a handwritten letter Paul wrote to Joanne in June. What it said went against the will. He apologized, said he feared he wouldn't have time to rewrite it, and begged for her forgiveness if something went wrong after he was gone, but that letter never showed up in the legal files. The only person who knew about it refused to reveal who they were, saying they feared for their life." The Wall Street Journal later joined the chase. In a 2019 investigation, they asked the hard question: who really controlled Paul Newman's final will? The Guardian went even further, calling it the greatest theft of legacy Hollywood has ever seen. As for Robert Forrester, the man leading Newman's own foundation, after taking charge, he quickly doubled his own CEO's salary, cut funding for projects suggested by the Newman family, stopped support for charities Paul had backed for over 20 years, and most shocking of all, blocked all family members from serving on the board. In 2020, Nell took the fight to Connecticut State Court, asking for the will to be reopened. The court rejected her request, saying, "There is not enough proof that Paul Newman was of unsound mind when he signed the will." But in late 2021, an unexpected twist came up. One of Joanne's former assistants found a handwritten letter tucked inside a copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, a book both Paul and Joanne loved, hidden in their private library in Westport. The handwriting matched. The fingerprints were real. Its message was short, but heartbreaking. "My dearest Joanne, if I am no longer clear enough to tell you this in person, then read it here. Everything belongs to you. From the name, to the career, to the reason I still exist after all these years. If anything goes wrong, know that I did not choose it. I love you until the very end. Paul." That letter had no legal weight, but it broke apart the whole picture. In 2023, when an ABC reporter asked Nell if she still wanted to reopen the case of the will, she gave a bitter smile and said, "Some things can't be fixed with paperwork. But I believe my father left the truth somewhere, and maybe he is waiting for us to find it. Maybe what Paul Newman tried to bury all his life was not money, not a recipe, not the fame that made Hollywood respect him. What he hid most carefully, beneath the calm smile and those blue eyes, was only his real self. A man who once stood under the bright spotlight, but closed his eyes in the shadows of secrets he never dared to name."
And when the last curtain fell, when whispers turned to blame, when files were opened again and inheritance was stripped away, the only thing left in Nell's heart was not anger, not resistance, not a lawsuit that never won, but a quiet love, a loyalty so deep that no will could break it. Nell had once been called Paul Newman's spiritual heir. She had once put her heart into the brand's products. She had once believed she would carry on her father's legacy with pride. But then, it was all erased, as if it had never been. The only thing that could never be erased was the bloodline, unseen but still bleeding more with each passing day.
I never stopped loving my father. No matter what he did, no matter how I was pushed out of every decision, I still loved him the way a daughter loves her father, Nell said, her voice cracking like a wound that would never heal during her last interview on CBS Sunday Morning in 2010. And yet, love does not always come with forgiveness. And truth, if never spoken, becomes a dark hole that swallows memory whole. I believe he loved us. I want to believe that's true. But I just wish he had been brave enough to live honestly. Not with the world, but with his own family, she said, her eyes empty of anger, showing only regret, the deep pain of a child standing in front of a door forever locked. She never explained what living honestly meant, but the audience understood. Everyone understood. Inside the hidden files, the unsent love letters, the secret meetings with men once called co-stars, and the quiet whispers behind the scenes, there was a man named Scott, another named Redford, another named Dean. All of them were pieces of a puzzle that would never be complete. There are secrets he took with him to the grave, but the ones left behind must carry that weight for the rest of their lives, punished by that silence. It was not only about the money, but also about the breaking of memories themselves. When a father becomes only a legend, his children are left with questions that will never be answered. And in the end, when the story ends, when the screen fades to black, only one quiet question stays in the minds of everyone watching. Are we really living as our true selves before it is too late? There are nights when Nell sits alone on the porch of the old house in Westport, watching the moonlight spread across the garden her father once cared for. The wind moves through the tall maple trees, carrying with it the soft sound of words that were never spoken. In that silence, she knows the most painful part is not the money that was lost, not the cold legal papers, not the endless rumors that never stop. The real wound is the emptiness that nothing can fill between a father and his daughter. An emptiness not made by distance, but by the walls of silence built over a lifetime of secrets. Nell knows that a daughter's love for her father never dies. It stays even inside anger, betrayal, and questions that will never be answered. Yet it is silence itself that has turned that love into an obsession, like a river forced to flow backward with no way out. And deep inside, she still wishes for one simple thing: that Paul Newman had just once sat down, looked his children in the eyes and told them everything. No matter how hard the truth might have been, at least it would have been the truth. Now, with nothing left but pieces of broken memories, Nell learns to accept that her father will always remain a paradox, a great legend to the world, but an unsolved mystery to his own family. And maybe it is that emptiness itself that stands as his real legacy. Not wealth or fame, but the haunting questions that will echo through generations. Do we dare to live truthfully with ourselves, or will we choose silence until the end? Behind the shining glow of fame lie letters never sent, children left in the shadows, and a truth that may have been buried with Paul Newman, never to be known again. Have you ever wondered what it would mean if a legend like him, a man praised all his life for honesty, carried a secret so deep that not even his own family ever knew it? Share your thoughts in the comments below because we really want to hear what you think. And if you believe this video should be shared, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it so more people can discover this story. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next videos.